thank you for having us, Remo.
Okay.
It's an honor to be able to interview you.
Well, thank you.
I want to go back to the early days. You
all
moved
right.
to Los Angeles from Indiana.
Yes, I
As a
did.
drum set player, right?
Yes, I did.
And you were playing with the Cats. I mean, you were with Billy Mays' band. That's a hard swinging band, right?
Ultimately got there, yes. My first got involved with, I'm a jazz drummer. Jazz drumming was the thing that occupied me through high school and so on and so forth, and during the war years. And my first true gig became with Anita O'Day. And I toured with her for a little bit. And then ultimately, yes, did end up, I was with the Lighthouse All-Stars in Hermosa Beach. Yeah, I did a lot of jazz.
So what's
drumming.
curious to me is you were a jazz drummer on the scene in Los Angeles.
There you
Quite
go.
an accomplishment. And then decided to start a drum shop. What was the thinking there?
The drum shop was a wonderful accident. Roy Hart at the time had a small drum shop, very small drum shop, and I was a customer. And I just happened to walk in one day and I bought something and we started talking about it, and then all of a sudden I know we got involved in What If, and then I borrowed some money and I invested in with Roy Hart, and that was the start of Drum City. So the original Drum City in 1952.
52.
Yeah.
Now by 53 you were starting to experiment with Mylar and forming drum heads out of that?
Well, I think I can help you out there. The DuPont developed Mylar in 1953. They introduced it to the industry, to the drum companies, to Slingerland, Ludwig, and I, Remo Belli, the jazz drummer in Drum City, used to go to Chicago, and I went to Chicago and I played there with Betty Hutton. I played the Shapery, the Schubert Theater, and then I would go to the factories because I was also a customer. They introduced me to Mylar. Bud Slingerland introduced me to Mylar, who was introduced to Mylar by DuPont. And Bud Slingerland says, I don't know what to do with this. And at the time, I wasn't concerned with doing anything with it.
Do you think the drum companies were centered around that area due to the stockyards being so close, or was that just coincidence?
Well, I think the whole idea that that whole idea there that had Elkhart, Indiana, Indianapolis, that had Cleveland, Ohio, Chicago, that whole general area is where everything was happening in musical instruments. Kalamazoo, Michigan, that was the center of the musical instrument business, manufacturing. I'm from Mishawaka, Indiana, 11 miles from Elkhart.
So you were in the area?
Oh, all the time.
Now, when you began experimenting with Mylar,
right,
you found a way to lock it in and to make plastic drum heads.
Well, the initial thing was just stapling Mylar to a wood flesh hoop.
Right.
And then I met a chemist by the name of Sam Muchnick, and it was Sam Muchnick who developed the technology of an open aluminum channel in which the Mylar was inserted in there with holes around the periphery, and then we poured a resin in there, and the resin held the Mylar in the channel. It was the first successful synthetic drumhead that could be made consistent.
Now, you mentioned successful. The response to it was positive from the drummers initially, right?
Well, that was the very, very fortunate thing with me is that I had on call at Drum City all of the very, very, very qualified drummers of Hollywood. And there were some very, very good players. Everybody, all the names you'd want to name, including all the studio musicians, which at the time was the top of the heap of professional musicians.
And they embraced it? It wasn't any pushback that it wasn't calf?
No, because the results were so interesting. The thing that we had to overcome initially was the guys like Jake Hanna who played brushes, you know, There was no brush.
Trying to come up with a surface that would work with brushes, which you soon did.
Yes.
Now, the impact of that was substantial in manufacturing, in distribution, in touring, and it doesn't go without notice that when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, and they had that iconic bass drum head that said the Beatles,
Right.
that was a Remo plastic head.
Yes, it was.
So I'm not the first to observe that possibly the whole dynamic of the explosion of the rock and roll industry may not have happened or could not have happened the same way without plastic heads.
Well, I don't. It couldn't have happened. The dynamic of it was the amount that was needed at the time that it was, and that was a lot. And so there was, I've shared with a lot of people, the United States couldn't possibly keep up with it. Slingerland, Ludwig, there was a small company in Ohio, Kent, that also made drums. And there was Leedy, Ludwig, and Elkhart, Indiana, couldn't even begin to keep up. So different American wholesalers went to Japan. And at the time there were 20-some manufacturers of drums in Japan. And Japan was turning out 30 to 35,000 five-piece sets a month. And so there weren't enough animals to even consider.
Now, did that explosion surprise you, or was this something you kind of knew in the back of your head was going to happen? Or was there a point in time when you had to stand back and go, wow, I never thought we'd get that big that quickly?
No, wow is what it was, because there was no way of anticipating something that happened in that manner. Rock and roll, as all of us know that are in the music business, was a thing that was well known in the United States for a long time, so I'm not sure what that moment in history was that it was what it was, and when a group like the Beatles or Elvis, we were playing rock and roll a long time ago, rhythm and blues and so on and so forth, nothing new.
Now you mentioned the brushes on the surface being an initial obstacle. I imagine the product line grew based on interacting with artists.
Yeah.
So that you have different types of heads over the years that came from responding to artist desires, since you were in such close contact with them?
Well, fortunately, and I was interviewed at length by the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian goes on record when they invited me to speak there, is that if I wasn't the drummer, and if I didn't have the conditions that I had to work with, had that same thing been developed in Splitsville, Oklahoma, in no way could it have made it within the time area that it was made. So it was very fortunate that I had a very good knowledge. I'm very qualified with calf skins and animal skins and so on and so forth. I'm very good with that. So I knew the nuance.
So it took a drummer and a businessman
there
to make that work.
Yes.
And you were perfectly qualified for that.
Yes.
Along those lines of working with drummers, you were instrumental in implementing PAS, right? Progressive Arts Society?
Yes.
What is that, like early 60s?
I believe so.
And that led to PASIC,
yes.
the Levins we have every year?
Yes, I used to go to the Sherman Hotel in Chicago during the Midwest Band Directors Association. And it was some of the members of the Midwest Band Directors Association, those that were involved in percussion, and that's when I began to meet them.
And that was a small handful of industry people and artists. And
teachers.
Teachers.
Professors, yeah.
And were you surprised at the growth of that as well? Of PAS?
Well, the PAS, the growth of PAS was the instructors themselves, the Jack McKenzie's, the Don Kennedy's, the number of people that were very qualified to do it and able to do it. And they're the ones that really made PAS. And PAS came about because the conditions within the education business, the sending of kids, of students to various competitive festivals of sorts, there was a lot of confusion because the average band director, orchestra, or music educator knew nothing of percussion. So it was the people that were involved in percussion that were trying to get information to everyone else as to what direction it could go into. And the hot spot was in Illinois there. And so the whole idea was the industry was controlled by the Ludwig Drum Company, by the Rudimental Drummers Association. Nothing wrong with the association other than it identified itself predominantly with stiff rudimental playing. It had nothing to do with marimbas, vibraphones, and ensembles and things of this nature here.
So over the years, we've seen the scope of percussion greatly expand. And I want to ask you about that in a moment, but I'd like to explore this dichotomy within you of the creative side, the artist side, and the businessman side.
Yeah.
I'd take a guess about you and say you're much more delighted and have more fun and interest in the creative side than maybe the nuts and bolts of everyday business. Is that fair to say?
No, it's not only fair to say, it's true to say. Yeah, I'm not, in per se, I'm not a good bean counter. But insofar as my instincts, insofar as being able to sense that I discovered within myself that I did okay with it.
Well, let's look further into that. In the 80s, now you came up with PTS drums, which was what, pre-tuned system?
Yes.
And that was a way where you could tell us what was that?
Well, pre-tuned system had to do with how do you replicate the idea that was possible with the calfskin head, in which it didn't need a mechanical device to tension it, that it was already pre-tensioned when it was stretched over a cavity of some kind. And so we discovered a way of handling mylar so that after we had attached it to a shell, we could shrink it to where there was a sound. And so that then created the PTS concept, because the results were the item came out perfectly tuned, and our interest was always how do we get as many people possible that would get involved in wanting to, at the time, play drums.
And to that end, you've stayed true to that, making percussion a more inclusive endeavor. If we look at every culture in the world, they have percussion. And so you began producing instruments with global instruments, djembes, ashikos, doumbeks, all manner of instruments. And then that naturally led in another field, I think, for you, which was health and wellness. The idea that it feels good to play percussion. Now, I know your son is a doctor, your wife is a doctor. Do they have something to do with moving in this direction, or was it something you always felt?
Well, yes, because I'm in the caregiving business, you know. We've been, I think I've gone to as many medical conventions as I have musical conventions. So it wasn't a stretch for me to think in terms of conditions, or what prevailing conditions, what preventive conditions could be that keeps the health of whatever in reasonable shape.
Well, that's another visionary advance.
Yeah.
Well, you should feel very good about it.
Well, the thing that happened is that pre-tune, the music therapy people there were a few drummers that were also music therapists. So they came to me requesting if I could make certain items for their continued research. So the first drum tables we made for Alzheimer's research were 25 years ago maybe, for the Veterans Hospital in Topeka, Kansas. And there's a lot of data that has to do with the use of the drum rhythmic with various disabilities. And disabilities thoroughly enjoy the drum. The majority of disabilities are very friendly to the drum. But the drum, in the concept of the drum as it presented itself, couldn't handle too many people because it was too loud and sounds too frank.
And also along those lines, you've been instrumental in facilitating the drum circle movement and putting it into corporate settings. Doesn't that instill a sense of egalitarianism in the corporate structures, or
well,
there's an element of that there too, right?
Okay, the thing I want the world to know, and I want you to know, and all of your readers to know, is that in the more than 25 years of research and over $20 million worth of expense in the research, that the use of music in general and rhythm specifically is what we're all about. And that's evidence-based research now. So what it is, so now what we developed is we developed programs, the use of rhythm in so many areas other than entertainment. And so now we work in 4 different areas. We work in a recreational, we work in behavioral modification programs in schools, we work with disabilities, and then we take on all at-risk possibilities. There's even now in Ohio, they've written a symphony that has a drum circle, and I've seen it, okay? And boy, that thing came out just beautiful, and these are all kids that are under the judicial system, and they're all playing, and they're all having a ball, and so on and so forth. So the use of rhythm generally now, forever, will be recognized as something much more important than ordinarily thought about.
And your role in bringing that to fore as well.
Yes.
So now with the buckets, I don't know what the marketing name is for your new products. The buckets that have heads that go over them. That's along the ideas of everyone's a drummer, right? Put a drum in every house.
There you go. There you go. Ours is if you don't have the tools with which to do the job that you intend to do, it's not going to happen. And that's what we've been fortunate enough to do. We're just in time, so to speak. Yeah.
Who'd have thought this back when you were playing
Not a bit.
jazz drums with Billy May?
Not a bit.
Well, thank you for your time. It's been
thank you
wonderful
for your
interviewing
time.
you, and I appreciate your insight.
Okay, I've enjoyed it.
Take care.
Thanks for the opportunity. You know, it finally dawned on me, you know, this whole thing of DuPont and development of Mylar and getting involved in making a membrane that plays, really historic. I mean, that sucker is really historic. And how in the hell I ever gotten away, I don't know.